Hello!
Hello!
Welcome to this very belated edition of Briar Rose Book Club. So obviously the book that we're talking about tonight is Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes. Slightly different shades between us.
Yeah.
And this was the August pick. For life reasons, the live show's been a bit delayed, but we're really grateful for your patience and really thank anyone who is joining us tonight for what is going to be an interesting but very hard discussion. I think this is like the most difficulty we've had with structuring a discussion because there's just so much information in this book, and I'm not a big non-fiction reader. I know you read a bit more than me.
Yeah, but I didn't know virtually anything about Greek myths and stuff, like very minimal stuff. Like
so yeah, this is going to be basically two people very inexperienced with these sort of academic texts, and the names are going to be hard. Already preparing everybody for the fact we're going to butcher the names. We've already said Eurydice a million times, and it's Eurydice. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it anyway, lovelies, and obviously we want to hear your thoughts as we go. Hello, Shara's here, and Leanne is here.
Yay!
And Aoife
I have an emergency snack if I get hungry, so
I appreciate the Halloween themes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aoife. So sweet. I tried to channel, the Greek sort of murdering vibe.
I'm almost like...
Yeah, you cosplayed as the book. So I guess before we get into like the nitty-gritty of like the slides that we've presented and like each individual story in this collection, my question would be to anyone that has read the book, how did you find it in terms of like reading a non-fiction book? Because I found it quite hard. And I guess a follow-up to that would be what story stuck out to you the most, because that's what I always find when I read a collection of shorter stories or an anthology of any sort. So obviously human nature, there are going to be ones that you remember more and ones that you don't. And I guess we could kick off maybe by briefly mentioning our favorites. So obviously we'll go into more detail later.
Well, it's like, it's so difficult because I feel like there are like, because obviously like it mentions throughout each chapter like different stories of each of the people. It's hard to like say, like favorite, but I've said to you that my favorite kind of story is still like Eurydice, and
the romantic one,
and then you were like the brutal like.
By contrast, my favorite was Medea, the one who murders her children, and I think maybe I've gone for that vibe. I think we've gone for quite polar opposite vibes, simply because we do not stand child murder in this house, but Medea as a sort of tragic figure I find very compelling, and the way that she interacts with the audience I found really interesting. Obviously we'll get into more later on, but those are our favorites, and we'd love to hear yours in the chat if you've got any. No pressure there, because it's quite hard to remember. And yeah, I think like I didn't make it easy for myself. I have to admit that I read this quite late in the day. I literally finished it today.
I did too.
And it's like a blessing and a curse, because I was very stressed about getting it finished on time, having all the information there. But had I not done that, like say if I'd read it like 2 weeks ago when I was supposed to, I would have forgotten literally everything by now.
Some of them merge in my mind as well. The one that's kind of like the bad stepmother and then bad like wife, and that there's similar kind of
So obviously I assume no one is here that, maybe people who haven't read the book are here. So just to give you a little bit of a taste of what this book is, I'm going to read a very short introduction, and then we'll just get right on in and talk about each of the individual stories of the women mentioned in the book. So, and hopefully my Wi-Fi won't cut out this time the way it did on the last one. That was so embarrassing. Yeah, I actually asked my dad specifically if he was going to be on Zoom this evening because I was so embarrassed. Anyway, here is the introduction to Pandora's. When Harry Hamlin stood behind a pillar in the darkness of Medusa's lair in the Ray Harryhausen film Clash of the Titans, flames flickering off his shield, his face glistening with sweat, my brother and I were transfixed. Perseus holds the shield in front of his eyes to protect himself from Medusa's stony gaze. He watches the reflection of a slithering monster outlined in front of the fire behind him. This Medusa has a lashing, snakish tail, as well as the traditional snakes for hair. She is armed with a bow and arrow and can knock one off Perseus's comrades off his feet with a single hit. As the man sprawls on the ground, she glides forward into the light. Suddenly, her eyes flash bright green. He is turned to stone where he lies. Medusa fires another arrow, this time taking Perseus's shield out of his hands. Her rattlesnake tail quivers in anticipation of the kill. Perseus tries to catch her reflection in the glinting blade of his sword as she knocks a third arrow. Medusa inches closer as Perseus waits, turning his sword in his hand. The sweat has formed beads across his upper lip. At the crucial moment, he swings his arm and decapitates her. Her body writhes before thick red blood seeps out from her neck. When it reaches his shield, there is a hissing sound as it corrodes the metal. This film, along with Jason and the Argonauts, was a staple of my childhood viewing. It was a rare school holiday when one of them wasn't on TV. It did not occur to me that there was anything unusual about the depiction of Medusa, because she wasn't a character, she was just a monster. Who feels sorry for a creature who has snakes for hair and turns innocent men to stone? I would go on to study Greek at school because of these films, and probably also because of the children's versions of Greek myths I had read. A Puffin edition, I think, by Roger Laceland Green. My brother tells me we had a Norse one too. It would be years before I came across any other version of Medusa's story, anything that told me how she became a monster or why. During my degree, I kept coming across details in the work of ancient authors which were quite different from the versions I knew from simplified stories I'd read and watched. Medusa wasn't always a monster, Helen of Troy wasn't always an adulterer, Pandora wasn't ever a villain. Even characters that were outright villainous, Medea, Clytemnestra, Phaedra, were often far more nuanced than they first appeared. In my final year at college, I wrote my dissertation on women who killed children in Greek tragedy. I have spent the last few years writing novels which tell stories from Greek myth that have largely been forgotten. Female characters were often central figures in ancient versions of these stories. The playwright Euripides wrote 8 tragedies about the Trojan War which survive to us today. One of them, Orestes, has a male title character. The other 7 have women as their titles. Andromache, Electra, Hecabe, Helen, Iphigenia in Aulis, Iphigenia among the Taurians, and the Trojan women. When I began hunting out stories I wanted to tell, I felt exactly like Perseus in the Harryhausen movie, squinting at reflections in the half-light. These women were hiding in plain sight in the pages of Ovid and Euripides. They were painted on vases which are held in museums all over the world. They were in fragments of lost poems and broken statues, but there they were. It was, however, while debating the character of a non-Greek woman that I decided to write this book. I was on Radio 3 discussing the role of Dido, the Phoenician queen who founded the city of Carthage. To me, Dido was a tragic heroine, self-denying, courageous, heartbroken. To my interviewer, she was a vicious schemer. I was responding to her in Virgil's Aeneid. He was responding to her in Marlowe's Dido, Queen of Carthage. I spent so long thinking about ancient sources, I'd forgotten that most people get their classics from much more modern sources. Marlowe is modern to a classicist. Dismal though I think the film Troy to be, for example, it has probably been seen by more people who have read the Iliad. So I decided I would choose 10 women whose stories have been told and retold in paintings, plays, films, operas, musicals, and more, and I would show how differently they were viewed in the ancient world. How major female characters in Ovid would become non-existent Hollywood wives in 21st century cinema. How artists would recreate Helen to reflect the ideals of beauty of their own time, and we would lose track of the clever, funny, sometimes frightening woman that she is in Homer and Euripides. And how some modern writers and artists were finding these women, just as I was, and putting them back at the heart of the story. Every myth contains multiple timelines within itself, the time in which it is set, the time it is first told, and every retelling afterwards. Myths may be the home of their miraculous, but they also are mirrors to us. Which version of a story we choose to tell, which characters we place in the foreground, which ones we allow to fade into the shadows, these reflect both the teller and the reader as much as they show the characters of the myth. We have made space in our storytelling to rediscover women who have been lost or forgotten. They are not villains, victims, wives, and monsters. They are people.
Yeah.
So I think obviously that gives quite a nice overview of the ethos of the book. Is bringing light to these women who are often overlooked or simply just misrepresented. And what I found interesting, obviously, that we can talk about in specific cases when we go into the women specifically, is that often the modern ones are like more reductive than the ancient
than the
sources,
ancient.
which I find really interesting, because you would think obviously the further back you go, the more sexist, the more sort of barbaric, the more sort of like mundane the stories are, but that's actually not the case. They're more often simplified and sanitized the more recent they are, which I thought was something that obviously is just quite, you don't expect that when reading. So I'm gonna share, allegedly, there we go. Oh, we're tiny now. So yeah, welcome to the slideshow, a favorite now of Briar Rose Book Club. And lovingly and rushedly handcrafted by yours truly at the 11th hour. So we're gonna begin, as the book begins, with Pandora, the titular character of the book. The book is called Pandora's Jar, and obviously it is a story that a lot of us will already be familiar with, and it's one of those things I can't even remember the first time I heard the story. It's just kind of there, like a bit like fairy tales in that way. Like it is just suddenly there, and you don't really remember how or why, who told it to you. It's just it's there.
Also, as it she says in the book, like it's kind of like they come up as well as stories and like films and different interpretations of like the narrative. Like it also comes up as like phrases. So like, oh, they've opened like Pandora's box and like created chaos and stuff, but like, so it's kind of just built into our kind of language, I guess.
Definitely. And I think that's because they're so old, right? When people needed like euphemisms or whatever in that ancient time, there was probably a limited amount of stories they could draw on, which is why these are the ones that people talk about. But yeah, obviously the sort of overview of the basic myth of Pandora is that she is the original woman, a bit like Eve, who, opens this box, commits a crime, and then all evils are unleashed and the world is forever changed because of this one woman.
And then she's also like created to come down, to earth with the box. So it's kind of like she is also part of that, because she's the first woman brought in to cause chaos between men.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing as well that Natalie Haynes talks about, is that how much agency does she actually have, because she is created, I think, from clay, and then like she is brought to life by the gods, and she is placed on Earth. I was gonna say like something
so it's
else,
like in some like she is like the Pandora's box. It's like
and obviously there are a lot of versions of this story, and that's what I found quite difficult and also, I guess, liberating, because I think I told you that because I was a Percy Jackson teen, I was very into my Greek myths. A lot of people always assume that I know quite a lot about the original myths, and I think I didn't take a lot of what happens in Percy Jackson as gospel, obviously, because they're works of fiction, and the characters of Percy and whatever did not exist in these stories. And I think I've always really hesitated to try and talk to people about Greek myth, because I've been so scared of getting things wrong, because there's so much to keep track of, and obviously even the names like differ. So you've got the Greek names and the Roman names for the gods. So I think like Zeus in Greek mythology is obviously Zeus, and then in Roman mythology is Jupiter. So like even the names I find confusing. Things like really easy to slip up. And I guess what was really interesting about this is that even if you tell someone a story of something that happened in a Greek myth, even if you get it wrong, there's probably a version that corroborates what you said, because there are so many different ones. And in regards to Pandora, there are versions where, she opens the box, and then, the last thing that remains in the box, I think, is hope. And there are different interpretations on whether that's a good thing.
It's like stuck under the lid.
So. I mean, is it horrible that hope remains in the box and like humanity isn't given hope, or is that a good thing?
Be saved,
that it's protected. So
And then there's also versions that, you know, Natalie talks about where it's like she releases all that's good, so it, you know, like is no long, you know, like runs off, as it were. So there's no good left because it's all like gone missing. So it's that's quite strange. And then obviously, like, the title of the book is Pandora's Jar, so it goes into the fact that you know, in some of like the first, you know, kind of writings of the tale, it's a jar, like a specific kind of Greek
so they talk about like the
jar.
mistranslation element of it, because I think in early versions it was this like Greek jar that had a very long neck.
Yeah, and so was extremely like vulnerable to being like pushed over, or, you know, so it makes more sense that Pandora would, you know, kind of knock it over accidentally, rather than, you know, it's quite purposeful, the action of opening a box.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's, and I think one particular writer just got the translation wrong. So it's you know, I guess it's more, you kind of have more sympathy for her.
And also, yeah, there are versions of the story where she just opens it of her own accord, and then versions where she's specifically told not to, in which case, like, I sympathize, because how often have you wanted to do something and then someone tells you no, and that just makes you want to do it more. And obviously this is a theme that, oh my god, continuously crops up and like inspires writers, and I think, oh my god, Bea, you're like half off the screen. Not that it matters, we're so small. But I couldn't help thinking of, like, you know, the Bluebeard myth, which I know we're both a fan of, especially Angela Carter's retelling. You know, specifically being told, you cannot open this, you cannot do things. And if anything, like, thinking about it in context of Bluebeard, that action of her opening it reflects more on the man, right? The man that she uncovers his secret about. And the act of Pandora opening this box reflects more about the people that drove her to do it, if that makes sense.
I mean, it's the same with like Adam and Eve, and like saying, oh, you can do anything, but you can't have this forbidden fruit. And then there's the snake who's like, have the fruit. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like in a way, I mean, I guess these kind of, you know, as well as being kind of like, you know, subjects and people in a story, it's also kind of like depicting a human feeling or like emotion, or like kind of you know, that humans aren't always like black and white, good and evil, and that people do have these strange desires to, you know, kind of investigate something that, you know, they shouldn't, or you know, go into out of bounds areas, or, you know,
yeah. And I think it's something that obviously people can relate to, and Natalie at the end of the chapter talks about things that have cropped up in like modern popular culture. So she mentions a specific episode of The Twilight Zone called Button Button, where I believe, I might have forgotten the details, but people get told if they press a button that somebody somewhere will die, but they'll get like 100 grand or like some big sum of money. And there's like no way to guarantee like whether it's person you know, someone who's young or old, and obviously the pull, you know, is too much for some people, and it's like the ethics of that, because obviously they don't know, like someone will die, like it could be anyone, but like does that matter? And it's like that sort of pull of the unknown, and obviously, you know, Pandora doesn't know that she's unleashing it, but the people in this Twilight Zone episode know that something bad will happen. They know someone's going to die, but Pandora didn't even have that, you know. She didn't know that something bad would happen.
And then the end of the story is that they press the button, and then they get told that this is going to go to, you know, someone else, and the implication is that they will be the people who die if the next person chooses to press it.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so it's like, because it ends with like, she, you know, obviously we was talking about this episode, and she said it ends with a quote like, oh, you know, it's like, you know, they're like, oh, this will go to like a stranger or something, and it's like the same wording that they put when they were explaining the rules, and like, oh, it could be anyone, you know. So you feel like it's just gonna like go on and
yeah,
on
and I guess that
people.
also explains why these myths are so prevalent throughout the decades, is because it's a theme that everyone can recognize, and we've all felt that like pull of the void.
Ah.
That is not a picture of me. My hair is not that nice.
It looks like
I'm glad you said the left and not the right.
No. I just say, like, I was looking at the picture on the right earlier, and it's like that body is like quite warped.
Oh yeah. The joys of old-timey paintings. Yeah. But thank you for joining, Kirian. It's actually a painting of Pandora. It's not me. Are we ready to move on? I got distracted thinking like, oh, someone's painted me. Very exciting. This one, Jocasta, interesting. And also you will notice the rather obvious blank bit on the right hand side, and that there's a reason for that, and it's because, and Natalie Haynes acknowledges this in the chapter, there's not a lot of paintings or depictions of Jocasta because, shock horror, she's an older lady. An older woman in the Greek myths. How dare she?
Interested in like depicting older women. I mean that's something that's carried on till today. I mean, should we talk about like Hollywood and how and like 30-year-old women play like 40-year-old women. You know,
it's like in Hollywood, you go from like the young girlfriend in your 20s, and then as soon as you get over 30, you're playing people's like aunts and mothers. It seems like, which is just crazy. Or if you're Leonardo DiCaprio, you're stop dating people when they hit 25.
Almost there.
I know, we've nearly hit the point that we expire. So yeah, Jocasta, I did a bit of not a faux pas. I just like was a bit stupid when I was reading it, because in the introduction it says that Jocasta was mother of Oedipus, and I was like, oh yeah, I know who Oedipus is, like cool. And then I wrote that down, and then later on it says, you know, Jocasta is wife of Oedipus. And I was like, hang on, is that a mistake? Like, she's already said that. No, and then
she's both. So this is where the Oedipus complex by Freud comes in. It was his inspiration. Because...
Do you want to tell the story? Also, thank you, Leanne.
Thank you.
We're your unofficial teachers who don't remember any of the actual important bits. We just talk about the
vibes. So basically, Jocasta has a baby son who is Oedipus, and her husband or partner of that time gets news that this son will kill them.
A prophecy.
That will kill the so he makes, you know, them kind of kill Oedipus, but
they abandon
him and suppose that he's died. Which, I mean, in any story ever, if you haven't seen them die, they're not dead. You know, and then later on, she then marries Oedipus. I've forgotten what happened to like the. Oh yeah. Oh.
I was waiting for the bit that you missed. Yeah.
So the husband, which I've just forgotten his name.
Oh yeah. Obviously.
Jocasta's husband then is killed by a group of. They're told by a group of robbers. So it's kind of, they don't think that you know, this kind of vision has come to fruition because it's, you know, it seems like just a random thing, and that they know that, well, they think that Oedipus has died, but and then Jocasta marries Oedipus, who is, you know, that many years younger than, you know, her son would be. So, you know, you'd think maybe something.
Well, this is the thing,
but he's told more than her.
He
so
gets told a prophecy when he's young that he will kill his father and have sex with his mother, and then
she just knows that the son will kill.
I don't even know if she knows that, because don't they?
I think she does, because the husband knows.
Yeah, but doesn't he just find a way to get rid of the baby because he has like warped feet or something? I don't know if she knows that that's the reason.
That might be
because
true.
they talk a lot about how he has so much more information than her, but he just doesn't believe it. Because
Jocasta realizes what has happened before Oedipus.
Yeah, exactly. She's so smart.
So she gets with Oedipus, and then it, you know, obviously,
and in some versions they have
together.
Children, and in some they don't, and that's interesting because in some they have 4 children, so it's like one child you think, okay, that's a woman doing her duty to like give the man a child, whatever, but like 4 children shows that they had a pretty sexual relationship and a heavy attraction to each other, and like a fruitful relationship regardless of, you know, the incest.
Also a lot of time had passed
and obviously, you know, Natalie Haynes talks about the fact that she isn't, you know, like potentially the reason that people don't want to depict her is because she is an older woman who is undoubtedly like sexually attractive, and like Oedipus is obviously attractive and active as well. And obviously until she knows the truth, you know, there's no shame in her being that. And I found that interesting, that like the part that people are most uncomfortable with is not the actual revelation of the incest, is the fact that before they knew that, they had this healthy, normal relationship for an older woman. I find that weird, but that's just how it be.
So she realizes that basically it's her, you know, son and husband, Oedipus, and she in some versions goes and then hangs herself, and then other versions she does stay alive.
So there's a version where she stays alive and I think lives with the shame of it. But then in that version where she stays alive, they lock up Oedipus, don't they? And then her 2 remaining sons end up killing each other on the battlefield. And then she goes over to them and mourns them, and then stabs herself in the throat, I think.
With their like sword or something. So it's like a more of a mass, like Natalie talks about how like it's more of a masculine
weapon.
Death, you know.
Because isn't it like poison is with the women's weapon, and that you see that a lot in everything like crime novels, Agatha Christie, that poison is the woman's weapon of choice rather than anything physical like a gun or a knife or anything where you have to get close to somebody to, you know. But so I mean, this one is interesting simply because obviously I think the most famous example of Oedipus in anything is Freud's Oedipus complex. And I low-key got the impression, I don't know if you did as well, that Natalie Haynes has not a lot of time for Freud. Because there's a bit where she, I think later in the Medusa chapter, she also mentions that Freud has this theory about the story of Medusa being a castration myth, and she's like, this is ridiculous because Medusa is a woman. If anything, it's about fear of the female gaze rather than anything to do with penises.
I mean,
so there are
Freud
several points,
several things, which I mean, a lot of what he says, you know, people like, you know, disagree with. You know, it does have multiple interpretations as well. I mean, for one, with the whole Oedipus thing, that is very much his own issue with his mother. because he had different kind of theories for, neurosis and stuff before that, but he had a very like difficult relationship with his mother, and his way of dealing with that was saying, oh, all men want to fuck their mother and kill their father, and all women want to fuck their dad and kill their mother, instead of dealing with his own issues. So he was like, no, this is just natural. So and also I feel like I think his mother was like alive for a bit as well, so it's like he didn't want to pin like his kind of abusive child. I mean, because it was like, I think he did have an abusive childhood from the mother, so it's kind of in a way like, I mean, I guess it's in that way it's not black and white, because he was kind of a victim in his own way, but obviously the harm he's caused
from planting that seed
is that's difficult. And yeah, he does make a lot of things about castration and stuff.
Yeah. And about men, I think that's the thing. Like he obviously is coming at it from a male perspective, not a woman.
Said things like about, not understanding women, and like but then that some people interpret that as him saying that because there's just not enough kind of study, not that they're unknowable,
and I mean that's the thing, it's like it's not completely discountable because it opens that conversation, and maybe it compels women who then go on to study psychology and be like, actually no, I'm going to disprove that because that's stupid. And so in a way it could be inherently valuable just because it provokes people to try and disprove what he's saying. So yeah, and unfortunately, like I think there's not a lot more that we know about Jocasta. Obviously there's like different stories about ways in which that she died, but like we said at the beginning, there's like a sort of lack of paintings and depictions of her, and I think this is partly the reason, because she was this older woman who didn't really feel ashamed about her activity until it was made obvious to her, and her ignorance as well, I think is interesting. The fact that he had this prophecy told to him and then didn't suddenly remember that when he went to marry an older woman.
I think this is a theme throughout all the women like talked about in this book, is that they're all really smart and often smarter than their male counterparts, like in lots of different versions.
And it's not exactly, and I think what's interesting as well is that that's not just us saying that with a modern lens. Like it's not just us looking at the story being like, oh, she's really smart. Like in a lot of the ancient texts, like the women are actually like in text said to be smart and warrior like and all of these things.
Just Jocasta figures it out with less information.
Much information.
With much less before Oedipus does, and has enough time to like kill herself or like there's different versions.
And what's interesting is that I think as well she kills herself from the shame of it, and then he like stabs out his eyes afterwards with her brooch, and I think like because he can't like perceive the truth, obviously he's a bit stupid, but I just think that like I don't know, I just the fact that it's specifically the eyes, I don't know, as if like the act of seeing her and being attracted to her was the problem, as if she was at fault rather than like him just like stabbing himself because he was embarrassed about what he did. Like, you know what I mean? I just think it just seems a bit intentional, and I'm like, dude, this is your fault. Like, but yeah, in contrast with Jocasta, the next woman, the next chapter, has a wealth of art and paintings and everything, and that's because it was Helen
of Troy,
who is
Sparta,
whatever,
Sparta.
And obviously
originally Sparta, and then she goes to Troy, and that's what
causes everything. But she's often what's said as like she's the most beautiful woman, and her beauties that she was the face that launched 1,000 ships is the line that we all know.
And I mean, it's quite interesting just looking through like the art history of like how artists have chosen to depict her, because it's like shows obviously like beauty changes through time, like you know, different features are more, you know, loved and stuff. So that's quite interesting because you can
and very much like
how it changes.
That's a theme that she draws upon. You know, Natalie Haynes is talking about how whenever these stories are retold, they're a reflection of the time that they're told in. So even like down to the morals and stuff, like like you know, like we talked about, there are certain stories where Jocasta and Oedipus did not have any children, and that's because I guess audiences at that time would be uncomfortable with that fact, rather than because that's the truth. You know, I mean, the truth is a very elusive concept when it comes to these stories, but yeah, so Helen, you want to talk about the swan thing, how Helen came into the world?
I've forgotten the name. So it's Zeus and Leda. So Leda is Helen's mother and Zeus is her father, but Zeus turned into a swan to have sex with Leda.
We don't really know why.
I mean, they do say why, but it's and I think in one version, I think Leda turns into a goose to get away from him, and then he turns into a swan, and then does her. But it's me and Anna found this quite amusing.
Well, yeah, it's not actually not amusing if she was trying to get away from him, but you gotta like
that artwork.
You get a bit desensitized for all the rape.
You know, I'm showing the artwork in the book.
We also have it on the screen.
It's a different one though. There has been, Natalie, that says, oh, you'd think this would, you know, people would find this odd, but it's you know, been interpreted in paintings many a time.
Yeah, that's what I find interesting. Like, why was the swan such a big deal? Because it's how Helen comes into the world. I get it's like a funny image.
Yeah, but no one wanted to draw Jocasta.
Exactly.
But then they wanted to draw a swan doing a lady.
Yeah. There's a very graphic image that I vetoed putting in the presentation because I didn't think YouTube would allow it, but the swan is very close to a certain area.
But also
very graphic.
But also she describes like one which is like like, oh, what's her name again? Leda, like, is caught by like a nurse or maid or something, while Zeus, you know, and her having the swan is having sex with her, and she, like in the painting, she's like just like, you know, like pretending that Zeus the swan is just like a cushion because she's like been caught in the act and she's embarrassed. But anyway, we got a bit distracted
by the swan, as all the painters did as well. So Helen, after she is birthed in this way by Leda, is raised by King Tiberius and Leda, who are king and queen of Sparta. Also, briefly as a child, Helen is kidnapped by Theseus because he wants a bride, and at this point she is 7 years old. Yeah. In the earliest
and then sometimes
works, and then sometimes she's 10. And
sometimes she's
as if that's better. With Theseus. So in some versions, obviously, I presume it's not consensual, but she has a child with Theseus before her brothers come and rescue her and take her back to Sparta.
So basically, and a lot of writers have like tried to kind of make it okay by saying, oh, but she was just so beautiful. So how could anyone resist?
And that's just
a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
So
basically puts the blame on her. And again, when she, you know, the Trojan War happens, because she like elopes, again, a lot of contention around that too, whether she even decides to do that. Elopes with Paris, who is her lover, you know, leaves her husband Menelaus to go to Troy.
But it's not really her choice.
And then she's confronted though at the end of the war by Hecabe and Menelaus, who is her husband, and they're like, well, how do you justify these 10 years of pain and war and death, like in your honor, like all of these people that have fought this war because of you, because of a choice that you made. And then she has this huge monologue where she defends herself, and she actually places blame on Aphrodite, who's obviously a goddess with immense power. And that she felt
causes so much mischief.
yeah, exactly. And then she's forced into another marriage after her initial lover Paris has died, and she blames Hecate, who's the mother of Paris, you know, the lover that she ran off with, for not killing him when she received a prophecy when he was young that he would go on to cause this much death and destruction. And so again, it's this thing of like, you know, other people in the story that had knowledge of potential, you know, potentiality of violence that didn't put a stop to it, like Oedipus, and then the women just being the victims of that.
Victims. And also there's some versions that Helen didn't even know the war was happening or was in Egypt.
Yeah, and it's like a cloud version of her or something.
Yeah,
where like, you know, so this is the golden apple shit, isn't it?
No, so
because like Aphrodite gifts Helen as a gift to Paris.
Yeah, so it basically starts. Helen is with Menelaus in Sparta, in Greece, and basically Paris in Troy is kind of but he gets caught up in this game with these three goddesses where basically I think one other goddess releases this apple on the ground, which is a golden apple, and it says inscribed onto it, "To the most beautiful," or something. And then three, including Aphrodite
and I think Athene and somebody else.
And someone else, all fight over it because they're like, "No, I'm the most beautiful. No, I'm the most beautiful. The apple belongs to me. It's obviously came here for me, not you." Which is just iconic. And they make Paris choose who it should go to. And they each give him kind of try and bribe him, and Aphrodite bribes him by saying, "Oh, I will give you Helen of Sparta" at that point.
Who's the most beautiful in all the land.
Yeah, although she is currently married
to Menelaus.
Yes, so and he chooses Aphrodite, so she, you know, gives him
Helen. And there are some versions where it's not even Helen that is gifted. It's like a sort of ghostly cloud vision of Helen that Paris thinks is Helen and then takes to Troy. The war happens while Helen is like not even there and is away in Egypt and is like oblivious to all this shit that's going on.
Even if it isn't that version, she's like kind of caught up in a game.
Absolutely.
Made by the gods.
And it's suddenly her fault because she was so beautiful that people were moved to do
it's throughout her whole life, from her like rape to like, you know, she's just handed from one person to another, and it's just all these
and there's another version where this is the thing, I lost track of like which things happen in which version. But there is also an alternate version where the Trojan War was planned by Zeus in an effort to curb population, and that it was like foretold for a long time. And so whether or not Helen,
that Marvel guy,
I mean, I think probably there's quite a lot of like overlap there. I mean, they're the way that they've cast Thanos, and
it's also interesting though that was like a kind of worry at the time, like because she says this in the book, like she was like, it's interesting because at that time they were in the millions and they were like, oh my god, we're becoming overpopulated,
and now we're in billions.
We're like billions, and you know,
wow, so and there's a really interesting bit as well, which I think maybe this is just me latching onto it because we have our history of falling in love with boy bands and attractive men, but there's a section of the book where Natalie Haynes poses the question, why haven't tales of beautiful men survived? Because there are tales of women who are driven to madness over like men who were beautiful, and women were driven to violence, but these tales aren't readily as known. And obviously she's given an example that I've not written down, which is useful. But there's a quote that she says in the book where she says that there's a cultural readiness to accept female beauty as destructive. So when men are beautiful, it's like they are warriors, they are action heroes, it's told from their point of view.
Yeah.
But then when a woman is beautiful, it's
men are just uncomfortable to be
yeah.
the subject and the passive.
Exactly.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very much a double standard. Yeah. It's like, even when there are stories about women who are beautiful, it's always about what lengths men go to be with that woman. But if it's a story of a beautiful man, it's still a story of a beautiful man. It's not a story of a woman, really. So I find that interesting, because obviously in our culture there is both. There is obsession with beautiful women and obsession with beautiful men, but only one gets a different treatment in these stories, which I think is something that's interesting. And then obviously, like most of these chapters, Natalie Haynes ends a chapter on Helen talking about modern takes on her story, and she talks about a version of Agatha Christie in which there's a short story about someone who kind of looks like Helen, and they use that line, "A phase to launch 1,000 ships," and ends in murder, because Agatha, queen. And there's also a version of Star Trek where they imagine like a sort of sci-fi futuristic version where like Helen is on a planet and is taken to a different planet, and obviously Captain Kirk falls in love with her. What the fuck? I don't know. I was reading that like, oh my god.
She falls in love with him.
Of course.
Because isn't Captain Kirk like kind of asexual? I could be wrong.
No, that's Spock. I think
Spock.
Captain Kirk is like a famous like womanizer. He's the one who's like getting with everyone.
Yeah.
Spock's the one I think that's like not like that. Yeah.
I'll have to watch Star Trek.
Do we? Do we really have to watch Star Trek? But yeah, I think that's everything that I've got on Helen. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, a lot of these, I worry that this live show will start to get repetitive, because a lot of these stories, in a way, are repetitive in the sense that, like, this woman was actually clever and cool.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it, like, what else is there to say?
We wanted to also, like, propose just throughout the whole live stream the question, like, how much do you guys, like, know about like the Greek myths? Is anything that we're saying, or anything that if you read the book that you found surprising?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not entirely sure who here has read it, but I'm not going to single people out. But like, as we go along, if something occurs to you that like that's something that I didn't know, or like I knew about that already, and here's where I heard it from, because that's the thing. I mean, my knowledge of Greek myths was before this basically the horrible history books and Percy Jackson, both of which I like enjoyed, but I didn't necessarily trust as like academic sources when I was a kid. I think they're pretty accurate, but obviously you don't really take that information in. And I think this is definitely one. Oh, and I read Mythos by Stephen Fry, which is also good, but there's not a lot of crossover with the stories because he writes a lot about the men, which is fine, still enjoyable. But
I mean, I think I only kind of knew like the kind of some names and like some stories just through like I don't know, like
cultural osmosis.
Osmosis, and also like there's a lot of like pre-Raphaelite painters that but I'd only really heard their names and kind of maybe looked at the what's happening in the image, but then that's was kind of quickly forgotten and stuff. So that's all I really knew. So it's all new to me, a lot of it. So
if you're I would like to know if you guys, anyone can pinpoint when you heard these stories, because I definitely can't. But yeah, I mean, that brings us quite nicely on to the next one, which is Medusa, one which I think most people have heard of, but also I cannot tell you when or where or why I heard the story of Medusa. It just kind of appears.
Like jealous of her snake hair.
Yes. Yeah. So what do we have on Medusa? So in obviously a lot of versions of this. This is quite a weird one, actually, because
This
she talks a lot about, Natalie Haynes talks about how the Gorgon, or she's written it as something different, it's like Gorgonea,
Yeah, so
was
the
depicted,
headless,
you know, these headless figures that were used on war shields to like scare the enemy. And in a lot of artwork, these were depicted as, you know, just headless beings with snakes for hair. And people, well, Natalie Haynes sort of, there's a popular theory that the Medusa story was created by sort of ancient writers to give a reason to why they didn't have bodies. And it was sort of like an origin story for like why Gorgons weren't depicted with their bodies, which is kind of weird because it seems then very disconnected from a lot of the other stories, because it's like, well, this one didn't happen on its own. It was like people were trying to come up with an explanation for something else.
I guess though, like a lot of things are like that, like kind of like, you know, Persephone goes down to the underworld for a certain time in the year because it's like winter, and you know, like there's kind of all those, I guess a lot of these things, like, you know, throughout time started as explanations for things that we just didn't understand, or like even things that we maybe told, like, you know, children or something to like easily explain, and then they just got, you know, kind of change throughout the years.
It's interesting because often in these stories the common thread is that the story comes first and it inspires the art afterwards, whereas this is sort of the other way around, like the art has come first and then the story grew around it, which I find interesting because obviously that's rarer to happen. But yeah, so what I've got on Medusa in my notes is that she began as beautiful and in some versions was raped by Poseidon when she was young.
It's quite like Helen.
Yeah.
Like that she's kind of seen as this kind of
beautiful woman.
Well, she's this beautiful, but then seen as the kind of destructive woman, but she's not at fault for anything really that happens to her.
And yeah, so and then as a result of this rape by Poseidon, Medusa is punished, and I've written or saved, but we'll get onto that by Athene. Yeah, who turns her hair, which is widely known as Medusa's best asset, into snakes. And either this is seen as like a punishment because she's taking away her best asset, or is she saving her from any future male violence by taking away her most attractive quality.
And it's difficult because they, you know, say that Athene has a kind of history of taking down other women and you know,
not a girly girl, not a very girl's girl,
and just also kind of avenging her, you know, husband having, you know, sexual relations with other people, you know, kind of blames the women who obviously were not to blame for being hunted down by so I mean it's a terribly sad story.
And I mean also people often forget that Medusa is one of three, and she is dwelling in a cave with her two sisters who either like the curse of, you know, turning people to stone doesn't affect her sisters, or it's just so dark in the cave that it doesn't matter.
So her we should say, in case anyone doesn't know, like her so she has obviously has been cursed or like saved by having snakes for hair, and she also can turn people to stone by just looking at them. But that's another argument as whether she had the stone turning gaze before or like after this
snake incident. And what I think is interesting is that Natalie Haynes compares the transformation of Medusa to the transformation of Midas, who is offered like a gift from the gods, and he chooses to have the ability to turn anything he touches into gold, and very quickly regrets this choice. But he is seen as like sympathetic character, because you're like, well, who doesn't want gold? I mean, and that story is told as if you're Midas. It's like, okay, well, like he's this sympathetic character who just sort of got a bit too big for his boots, and like that's okay. Whereas the story of Medusa is told from the outside perspective, where we see her as a monster rather than someone who had something happen to them that was not what they initially thought was going to happen. And I've written down that
and then the other, the comparison, he actually asked for this power, and he only regretted it when he realized that, oh wait, I can't eat because everything I touch
and that's
turns
interesting,
to
because there are
gold.
some versions of the Midas story where he wants to give the power back when he like kills one of his children by turning them to gold. But then there are more popular versions where he just realizes that he can't eat, and then he's like, oh no. And so it's like a more selfish thing of like, oh, I don't want this anymore.
So but then with Medusa, it's not something that she ever asked for or anything.
And I thought, like, I just thought it was interesting bringing in that comparison, because it's sort of like, if you think about it in terms of gender, it's his deadly touch, but her gaze is deadly. And I don't know, I mean, I'm just reading into that a bit too much, but I just think that's an interesting comparison, that's what, I don't know, the way those stories are presented, like him as a sympathetic one, whereas she's the fear of the female gaze. What can we say? And then I think what's interesting as well is that we also, the most famous story of Medusa, where we hear that story, is when Perseus beheads her. Perseus is a hero. And he's just sort of doing someone's bidding. I can't remember. It's like this random king who wants to get with Perseus's mother. So he sends Perseus on a quest to just slay Medusa, because I want to like bonk your mum while you're away. That's literally why Medusa dies. It's like nothing, but it's not like some big quest like you have to save
she hasn't
somebody.
Like
she's not done
anything. She's just in a cave with her two sisters, minding her own business.
And that's the thing, is when Perseus chops off her head, he then keeps it in his little backpack or whatever, and he then uses it as a weapon. So it's like she causes more death after she's died because of what Perseus does with her head. It's literally any death and destruction that she causes is because Perseus killed her, and he's the fucking hero. How does that work?
It doesn't.
Like, what a dickhead. I'm sorry. And also, it's pointed out as well that he needs so much help to kill her. Like, he's told by, like, 3 different gods where he needs to go. He's given these flying fucking shoes. He's given this special backpack. He's, like, given so many things that will, like... And he's only able to kill her when she's asleep as well. He doesn't even kill her, like, in combat. It's just pathetic, honestly.
She's literally just minding her own business.
I know. And like what we've got on the screen here is obviously on the left a very famous sculpture of Perseus holding the head of Medusa, very iconic image in Greek mythology. There are several different sculptures like this. And then on the right-hand side is a sculpture by Luciano Garbati, which is a reversal of this, kind of tragic story where Medusa is in fact holding the beheaded head of Perseus, and it's one that I much prefer, if I'm honest with you. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know what we can say that we haven't already, said in the other stories.
I mean, one thing that we were, saying this is an exclusive to Medusa, but we were saying that we found it was a slight shame that the book didn't have more illustrations, because they have them at the kind of start of each chapter, but it's also like not written like who did it there. It's like you have to look at the list of illustrations, which is obviously a common thing, but it's just like it becomes kind of a bit tricky, and because of so much of the book is her describing illustrations and referencing them, it seems a bit odd to not have more of them in the book.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think a lot of what we know about these stories comes from these random bits of pottery and like paintings by artists at the time. So obviously a lot of Natalie Haynes' insight in these different versions comes from the differences in the artwork. And there were times where like it would be really nice to see those differences like side by side almost, and you just don't get that sort of visual aspect. It's almost like it could have been like a sort of art book in a way with like the chapters. Yeah, definitely. Are we ready
Is it
to
next to Amazon?
The Amazons? Indeed. Which is not a personal favorite. My personal favorite is Medea, but a fun one nonetheless, because another one where women are like a bit more than just, you know, hounded by men for no reason. And what I found was interesting, actually, I wrote down that it's the second most popular mythological figure found in vase paintings. And the first is Heracles or Hercules. So the Amazons are the second most popular, which I thought was cool because, you know, arguably, like, they kill a lot of men. So it's nice that they're popular.
The quote that you love.
So the chapter on the Amazons opens with this quote: "A bunch of golden shielded, silver axed, man loving, boy killing women." I mean, that's just so iconic. And Natalie Haynes, I think, in the chapter is like, well, if that doesn't make you want to join them, like, what will? Quite iconic. And also, I mean, we talk, I feel like I've mentioned the word liminal so many times in these lives, but I always latch onto it because I'm like, oh, cool. But she identifies that this is a sort of liminal existence for the Amazons. Like, they exist between the masculine and the feminine, between like civilization and kindness, between real and fantastical. They're like a very much hybrid of both, and this can potentially like add to their appeal throughout the centuries, because they probably appeal to like boys because like, oh cool, like women, you know, being attractive and ethereal and godly, but they also very much inspire women as stories of women that have fought back and won. You know, traditionally, like the Amazons are very much wedded to Ares. I think one of them is a child of Ares. I think it's Penthus. What's her name?
It's not the one that
Penthus.
It's not that one that's the child, I don't think. It's
Hippolyta, Queen of Amazons, daughter of Ares. And she has his belt, which was mistranslated as girdle. What is that? It's not a girdle. No. It's like a belt where you keep weapons. How annoying is that? And that's the thing that's just like, did no one think to check? I mean, come on. Because it's like one person says it and then someone else looks at that and then puts it in their version and someone else. Like, oh my god,
but they
just
want
check.
To sexualize the ladies.
Oh, it's not a girdle.
It's like, I was thinking actually, like, one like kind of interpretation that I really like remember was like an episode of Futurama, which is like they kind of go to this alien planet which is all like women, and they're like all quite muscular and like really tall, and I think it's supposed to be like the Amazons. And like they're really over sexualized and stuff, and like they keep Fry hostage and kind of like have sex with him repeatedly / rape him repeatedly. But it's seen as like, oh, he actually enjoys it, because obviously like all men enjoy sex and can't be raped because they enjoy it. You know, it's very backwards now you look back on it. But yeah, no, it's interesting that what you were saying at the start, like how it appeals to a lot of people, because I feel like that is for the right and wrong reasons. You know, it's empowering obviously to a lot of, you know, women and just people that, you know, because they are powerful, when, you know, the kind of sisterhood and their kind of the way their kind of society works, of, you know, there's not one hero, there's many heroes, is all very nice and like empowering, but there's also a side that's kind of like sexualizing the women, like with the girdles.
And also the fact that Hercules is sent to steal the belt, which I think has a sort of sexual subtext. And then in the end, it's like he ends up killing her because he's paranoid about. So basically, like she and Hercules and Hippolyta are talking about what he wants. He's like, I want the belt. She's like, okay, sure. She actually like is willing to give it to him. And then some gods tell the rest of the Amazons that Hercules is a threat, so they're all riding towards her. Chaos. They're all riding towards her to like warn her. And then when Hercules sees all these like approaching warrior women, he just panics and kills her like an idiot.
And that starts like the first war with them. Which,
but and also, I mean, she mentioned at the very end of the chapter, the most modern sort of, I guess, widely seen version we get of the Amazon story is in Wonder Woman, which came out in 2017.
But also just like Wonder Woman from DC and from was it the 40s that she? Maybe. I think it was the 1940s that she came out as like a character, and it's kind of both as an empowering lady to women, but again another part was of it was sexualizing her and drawing her in all these ways where she crushes men with her thighs and like wears a like little dinky costume while she's like and it's kind of, I guess, catering to like
the
men
male
who
gaze.
Like strong, that kind of being dominated by a woman.
Woman who has the strength to dominate.
So, and then obviously it's warped into obviously the Wonder Woman now in comics is more kind of trying to cater towards kind of empowering women, but it at some points, I mean, we were discussing how like we enjoyed the like Wonder Woman, the first recent one, 2017, did you say? At the time, but it's like compared to the actual like tales, we were like, no, that's they got it wrong. Because that we were reading all this tales about how they would fight together, and like I was saying, that it wasn't one hero, it was many, and it was a kind of sisterhood, and that's you kind of see that at the you kind of see that at the start of the Wonder Woman movie. But then it then she goes off alone, and it's kind of like, oh no, she's one hero, and it's kind of, and then she becomes one woman among men.
Exactly.
So it's
and that's why she's like mythologized, because she's like this special person. And I think that like Natalie Haynes always says throughout the book that stories are a product of the time that they're told in. And I think modern culture, we have such an emphasis on like the special one, the chosen one. We have that myth, running all the way through our media. Like you can see it from literally any fantasy franchise. And I think obviously superhero films, it's like the chosen one who has the powers rescuing the people that don't. So it's like they don't allow. I mean, if every woman could train to be an Amazon, like that doesn't mean that she's special. Like it has to be someone special.
It has to be someone special.
And again, on that point of like sort of changing elements to what's the word, like adapt to like modern palettes. In the Wonder Woman film, Ares is the villain. He's the god of war, and he's the villain that they fight at the end of the film in the woeful third act. It's terrible. I love me some David Thewlis, but that was a bad role choice for him. But obviously in the original myth, Hippolyta, Queen of the Amazons, is daughter of Ares, and they glorify war, and they're warriors, and they take pride in the fact that they make weapons, and they are artists of war. Whereas now in our modern culture, we're very much like peace loving. Like we don't glorify war in that same way, and it's not seen as this big heroic skill to go out and kill people. Whereas in ancient Greek times it obviously was. It was this very coveted ability to go out and know the art of war, whereas now we have obviously less of a need to know those things, and that's sort of, I find that really interesting, like societal shifts that affect the way that we tell the stories. And then Buffy, I've got in my notes, I've just got written Buffy because I've not seen it, so I can't elaborate.
Natalie Haynes talked about how Buffy is kind of inspired by the Amazons, the kind of
warrior woman.
It's warrior woman, and it kind of obviously, like, if you've not seen Buffy, it starts off with her being like the chosen one to protect. There's one slayer in the world, and they protect, the world from evil, whether that be vampires or like other monsters. But then by the end of the series, Buffy makes it so any potential slayer can now become a slayer. So it's kind of given to all the girls, which is kind of more of the kind of culture of the Amazons, like
a
all power is, so that's nice. I mean, obviously Joss Whedon is a difficult subject always, but
sorry, I'm struggling to breathe. My jeans are digging into me. Carry on, I'll be with you in a second.
But so that's a kind of interesting modern kind of take on
the Amazon story.
The Amazons.
And we're not going to talk about Jeff. Jeff Bezos. And then we've got the one that I've been dreading. Jesus. Clytemnestra. There she is. Here she is. Who's heard of Clytemnestra? Anyone? Show of hands. Who knew about this myth? Not me. But I mean, like everyone else, icon queen, we stand. Girl boss, gatekeep. What is it? Gatekeep, girl boss, something else. She is basically the archetype for the bad wife, essentially, is what Natalie Haynes sort of has her down as. She is this long-suffering wife who has been waiting for her husband.
She's kind of
Jesus. No! Wait.
She's kind of...
Her husband is Agamemnon. Sorry. The play is by Aeschylus in 458 BCE.
So she's kind of like the opposite to Penelope, who we'll get to later, who's seen as the, like, the wife that we should all look up to, she's the opposite. She does not sit around and just wait for her husband.
Well, she does. That's the point. That's why they like her. She does sit around and wait for him.
No, Clyde. She doesn't.
No, she doesn't.
Penelope does.
So
she is very annoyed.
She is very annoyed. So the play is called Agamemnon, which is annoying because that's her husband's name. But anyway, the play opens with a watchman who is on the tower watching for some beacon of light.
I just got
who is watching for some beacon of light that will signal Troy has fallen and the war is finished, and Agamemnon, husband of Clytemnestra, that flew off the tongue there, getting better, that he can come home. And obviously, this is potentially a good thing. Her husband's coming home. It's not. She's not very happy that he's coming home because, and I'm not sure about the exact timeline of this, but basically her husband, Agamemnon, sacrificed their daughter. Killed her.
I've forgotten her name. It begins with an I.
I know. It's like if there's something. Jesus, why have I not written it down?
So he sacrificed her because he needed a blood sacrifice to get
sail somewhere.
No, I think it was to sail to the Trojan War. Safely, and he needed a blood sacrifice, and he was like, "All right, give me my daughter. That's all right."
Yeah, because she was like the only woman on the ship, I think. And that's like the they only wanted a woman, and she like begs for her life.
Yeah, it
and
had
he's
to be a
like,
woman,
yeah.
and so basically, quite rightly so,
there
Clytemnestra
you go.
is, you know,
Pissed.
holding a grudge. You know, well, probably more than that. He's, you know, he killed her daughter.
Yeah.
With not much thought or anything. So, but he's kind of unaware that she is pissed.
No, this man and the audacity. He comes back from war, you know, also keep in mind, killed their daughter, comes back and is like, by the way, can you be kind to my war bride that I've stolen and raped?
Yeah, and it's like, well, this is how life will be now. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
And with my
and this
bride,
poor woman, Cassandra, Cassandra, this woman that's been taken by Agamemnon as a prize for something fucking stupid, I'm betting he did, you know, immediately recognizes the bad vibes when she's in the house. You know, she notices like this anger that's been boiling under the surface, and she has this vision of like furies dancing on the ceiling, and she's like, I'm calling it, prophesizing my own death and like Agamemnon's death and everyone else's fucking death. Everyone's gonna die.
Again,
this
women
place
know.
is bad vibes.
Yeah.
I don't want to be here.
But
we're
they're
literally
just
like
surrounded by clueless men who are just like, yeah, it's fine. You know, like, what's wrong with this? I brought back a bride. You know.
Yeah.
And I think Clytemnestra has heard throughout, you know, heard rumours and things throughout the war that he's been unfaithful to her throughout.
Oh, yeah.
And she now has her own lover.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was, I mean, both from the fact that she was already detested him for killing her child, but also hearing that he was being unfaithful.
Yeah.
So no, she didn't, you know, sit down and, you know, be, you know, take no lovers.
Yeah.
Throughout the time, you know.
And I mean, there's like a weaving subplot, and I don't remember. I've written it down that, you know, she's a weaver.
Is like a desired trait of wives of this time. And Penelope, there's a lot of weaving that she weaves.
Who weaves? Anyone? Do we have any women who weave? Do you weave?
But I do not weave, but she uses weaving in a sinister, well, I mean, I think it's quite iconic, but she's like, oh, I'm just going to go weave. And, you know, her husband's like, oh, we're weaving. And
the desirable
and
thing
then
for
she
my wife to do.
Weaves him a trap.
Yeah, she weaves him an actual straitjacket.
Picture. Oh my god, you should have used the picture because it's so funny.
What picture?
It's so funny. It's like, this is him in the trap. Like, this is him falling down because he's like, oh wait,
I don't know if you can even see that.
Like, he's in the trap and he's like, oh no, I can't move.
Oh no.
And I think in this one it's like her lover that's killing him in the trap.
Yeah,
but,
and in this little vase that we've got on the screen here, that's Clytemnestra killing Cassandra, who is the enslaved war bride, who honestly did nothing wrong, but we're just gonna gloss over that. Some girl on girl crime is happening.
Yeah.
But also I find, again, the multiple variations are really infuriating, because in later, sort of in Homer, you know, who's a writer, I always think of The Simpsons when I say that, and in later like Roman texts, Clytemnestra is purely driven by sexual jealousy, and there's no mention of her daughter being sacrificed. It is purely she's angry because he's been unfaithful in, you know, the gap, and also bringing her bride, you know. And then in The Libation Bearer, which I believe is another play, another adaptation, Clytemnestra does succeed in killing her husband successfully, but then she is killed by their remaining son, because it is his sort of duty to avenge the death of his father, even though it was his mother that killed his father. And then after he does that, he's pursued by the Furies, the Fates. So it's like, it's crazy map and web of things, and obviously when they're all layered on top of each other, it's like very hard to keep track of. Yeah, like who's in the right and who's in the wrong, because someone does something that's right, they're avenging somebody, that leads, the person that they're killing, Oret says kills his mother, who's been like persecuted and
also it's interesting that they are against the mother because she's only like in the version where her daughter dies, she's only like kind of avenging their sibling, but it's kind of the daughter's thought of as kind of worthless.
Yeah, it's like, why does he have to avenge his father and not his sister?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's
gender. Not gender, sexism.
I was thinking, when we were like the audacity of him to bring back his war bride and just be like, this is how it is. Reminded me of in the latest Love Is Blind. where I've forgotten their names, but where that guy Damien brings his side girl to the reunion that is the anniversary of like him with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend is there, and
oh dear. Who had like that on their Pandora's jar bingo card that Bea would mention Love Is Blind?
I was thinking like how can anyone be that stupid? But then we have a recent example of men having the audacity.
The audacity, indeed. That's going to be the title of my memoir. The audacity. And I think we should move swiftly on because we're actually like been talking for an hour and 20 minutes. We're gonna really be up against it.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, my dad's gonna be so annoyed because he was gonna bring us dinner at 8:30, and we're gonna be like way behind. We might have to eat food because we're not gonna do any of these women a disservice by not talking about them.
Okay, so
I love this comment. The lie, the witch, and the audacity of this bitch. I mean, iconic behavior. So who's this, Bea?
Oh no.
Go on.
Eurydice.
You got it.
Thank you. Me and Anna both thought for the longest time throughout our whole lives. I had been like had a dirty look from my mum when I said her name wrong once, and she did tell me how to say it, but I forgot again. We keep thinking it's Eurydice,
which I think sounds nicer.
But it's actually Eurydice.
So awkward to say.
So this was one of my it was one I kind of already knew, but I do really like it because it's like, I'm quite like romantic. And
there are lots of arguments that say that it's not actually romantic. I know,
but I do think both. I'll come back with why I like it later, because in case people don't know.
We'll do a quick run through. So it's a classic sort of romantic story with Orpheus and Eurydice, and on the morning of their wedding, when I was initially reading it and making notes, I didn't realize it was the morning of their wedding. I thought she was marrying somebody else, and I was like, why is he coming? But so it's the morning of their wedding, and she is getting ready, and then she steps on a snake or something, and she's bitten, and she dies. Like,
and there's one version where she's running away from a rapist as well, and then gets bitten on the snake. And then there's another where it's just she's running around with her
girlfriends.
And
so then
which I prefer that.
Exactly. So Orpheus, obviously, his wife is no longer with us, R.I.P. He's very upset by this, so he travels down to the underworld, this big sort of perilous journey. And in the best known version of this story, which is Georgics by Virgil, which dates to 29 BCE. I didn't know that, I had to look it. In this version, it's this big perilous journey, and he's singing this beautiful song which makes the dead weep, because Orpheus is a renowned lyre player, and this is, I think, the story that has been adapted the most in terms of opera, because obviously it's a very attractive challenge to musicians
yeah.
to compose music that will literally make the dead weep, right? So it's this beautiful
and
lament.
stop everyone like in their tracks. Like there's some like guy being tortured, and like the torture device stops because
they're
iconic.
so enchanted by this music. And then in the original Virgil version, no one else speaks. So it's just made clear that Orpheus, wants his wife back, and he is granted that wish. Persephone gifts him his wife back, but on the condition that he can't look back at her until they are out of the underworld. So they are journeying out of the underworld. Eurydice is behind Orpheus and is being led out of the underworld by him. And it's this dark struggle of a journey, and he looks back because he thinks that he's lost her. He's not sure if he's there. He doubts, and it's his fear that drives him to look back. And then she sort of poofs into space. She gets dragged back down to the underworld, she vanishes, and he has lost her, once again. And it's this like heartbreaking story of a man who is like doomed by his own anxiety, which like mood. And then later, there's a different version. In Ovid's version, Orpheus, so initially in the Virgil version, Eurydice is the only one who speaks, and she does this speech of how she's been lost.
It is in this version also that it has the aftermath of
him being killed.
By women who want to, marry him.
Oh no!
It's because they want to marry him, but he won't marry anyone else. So they're like jealous of him. So he becomes beheaded, I think.
Fun. And then his beheaded head is like saying her name as he floats.
Which I don't know why I find that funny.
It's like Eurydice. But in Ovid's version, Orpheus speaks a lot and has this huge monologue and speech to Persephone, trying to convince her to give him his wife back. And basically, he just wants her back. And the sort of heartbreak of this story is that if he loved her less, they might still be safe, because it's his overwhelming love, that drives him to look back at her.
So I mean, I like this story a lot because it's just, I quite like kind of tragic love stories like that, and also I think it's like
a bit Romeo and Juliet, isn't it?
Exactly, and it's really, I think, it works very well for like adaptation, like with we were saying with the musical like section, and just like some of the images are like really beautiful, and also I think it's like a beautiful kind of way to describe like nostalgia, and kind of like that it's kind of like Orpheus perhaps is more in love with like the nostalgia of their relationship than like the future of them both. So that's kind of what makes him look back. He can't help but look back upon the past, and I think that's like a beautiful metaphor for like anything in life,
very Gatsby,
that you lose. Exactly, and I love all those things. it's like there's a lot that I like about it, but it isn't necessarily, it just isn't the most empowering in this book of female characters. I mean, she has been, I think I would say like the empowering part that's kind of put in this book is kind of more recent interpretations or adaptations of the story.
Definitely. So there's mentions of female perspectives on this story, because obviously like a lot of these stories were rewritten and retold by men, because that's just how it was. But more recently, so there's a 1920, that 1925 is recent, in the context of what we're talking about. So 1925, there's a poem by she has a full name, but she goes by HD, a poem just simply titled Eurydice, which focuses on her anger at Orpheus because she is promised this salvation. She is so close to getting out of the underworld, and he basically just balls it up for her, and looks back, and then she's doomed, and she's the one who suffers the consequence of that, not him. He gets to carry on living. I mean, obviously he's sad, but she's the one who suffers the most, and that obviously that element of the story was not given voice in previous sort of retellings and iterations of the story.
Yeah, it's
and
mostly concentrated on his tragedy rather than her.
And you know, there's also a version in Caroline Duffy's very famous collection, The World's Wife, where she highlights women, famous women, who have been often overshadowed by their very famous husbands. And in this case, Eurydice has been overshadowed by the heartbreak of Orpheus. And it's sort of, you know, in that Caroline Duffy way, she takes a very comedic sort of wry tone. And Eurydice is angry, and she's almost prefers the underworld and that atmosphere. She's almost like trying to goad him to look back at her because she doesn't want to go with him. And that's
and she like compliments his like playing or something, or compliments him, which is what causes him to look back, because she knows that he won't be able to like contain himself
because he's so like
arrogant. And she kind of paints him as this stalker who's just like stalking her.
Yeah, she's like, why can't I get rid of him?
But one thing, that kind of interpretation of her wanting to stay in the underworld, which kind of, I mean, going back to kind of like Buffy, is that there's a bit where Buffy dies and she's kind of taken to like, you know, heaven, and then they bring her back, and like for the longest time she's super, and it's kind of like, I think the person who kind of brings her back is Spike. I could have got this wrong because it's been a while since I've rewatched it, but is Spike, and she's, you know, which is her lover, and she's kind of angry at, you know, him and the whole gang for bringing her back, because she just found like peace, and then now has to go back to like slaying monsters all the time. And I don't know, that I just suddenly like thought of that when I was reading, like oh, that's another example of it, just in everyday, just in low, like how these, you know, kind of myths and legends have just kind of like weaved into our, you know, films, and you know, without probably subconsciously as well.
Yeah, and I guess the sort of modern ones here, we've already spoke about poems, but she also mentions a film called Black Orpheus, which I've not seen, but sounds incredible, 1959. And also Hadestown, the musical, which, oh my god, I'm a musical theatre fan. I've obviously known what Hadestown is. I love Eva Noblezada, who originated a role in the original Broadway version of Hadestown. And I didn't fucking know that it was like Greek inspired, like Greek myths. It's called Hadestown, and I was always like, Hadestown. Like I didn't connect it in my head, and now I'm like, oh my god, I have to go and listen to that again with the knowledge. I'm so stupid. I've only heard like one song from it, so to be fair, I didn't have context. Maybe I would have pieced it together if I'd listened to more music. But like, oh my god, how did I not realize?
And also, can we look at the beautiful image on our right, which is from Gia Coppola's. She directed like a Gucci. They have like quite out there, like kind of short film / kind of showing off their selections, and she did an interpretation of Orpheus and Eurydice. Eurydice. Oh no. And yeah, it's really
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, the only other thing that I have, which is going to be too long, I think, to get into, but worth reading the book. I mean, obviously we can't relay every single detail that's in the book.
Yeah, we're going to read you the whole book.
it's the sort of an earlier sort of version of this story by Euripides from 438 BCE is called Alcestis, and it's a story about a husband and a wife, and this husband basically is told by Apollo, gets given this gift from Apollo, that when it comes to his turn to die, he can live longer if he finds someone to die in his place. And obviously it's like, well, who's going to do that? His wife offers and makes like this ultimate sacrifice, and then Hercules comes in and saves her, brings her back from the dead. So it's like a sort of parallel of the Eurydice story, but it's an earlier version, and it has a lot of differences, and it's definitely worth reading the book to find out more about that, because I mean that's what I regret as well, is like we're already running over time and there's still so much that we need to get through and still so much that we've left out. So if you're at this point in the live show, if you're still with us, one, thank you for being very patient with our ramblings, and two, you seem like you're invested, so I would recommend you go out and read the book, because there's just so much information that we just unfortunately haven't had time to gush about, but it's all in the book. I promise it's definitely worth reading. So with that said, let's move swiftly on to who's this, Bea? Who's this? Who's this? Who's this?
Tell it. Oh, Fedra.
Who did you think it was?
I didn't think it. I just have it in my head that it's said fedora, which is a hat. So it's, I don't know why. I mean, it makes more sense with Pandora.
To be Fedora, yeah.
But
no, because it's a P, not a fur. This is a fur.
I know.
It makes sense. Don't worry.
I know.
Oh, Leanne! No, thank you for being here. Honestly, I'm very, very grateful. Because this was the one I was most worried about to do. So I'm glad. I'm glad if you're here and enjoying it, because this was the one that I thought, oh my god, this could very easily just be a mess because there's so much.
I know, but we've actually found so much to talk about.
Yeah. But here we are, we're on to Phaedra, who is basically the embodiment of your classic wicked stepmother that we've seen classically throughout history in various iterations of, fairy tales and just other sort of stories. And she is the wife of Theseus, and she falls in love with her stepson, Hippolytus, not to be confused with Hippolyta, who is the Amazon queen. And I just realised it now sounds like Chipolata.
When you said, not to be confused, I thought you were going to say not to be confused with Hippo. I was like,
why would you confuse it with Hippo?
I don't know.
So where was I?
Yes,
so she falls in love with her stepson, which obviously isn't
which
great.
Is she's made to fall in love with him by God. She's kind of cursed. So she takes her own life, classic, when he rejects her, and then before she commits suicide, she leaves a note accusing him of rape. And actually Natalie Haynes talks about the sort of decision making she went through to decide whether or not this was in the book, because obviously it's a very controversial subject, and she has a really comprehensive paragraph where she explains that actually false accusations happen very little of the time, and stories like this are sort of what people point to, and it contributes to like this societal subtext, or sometimes overt text of women lying when they say, because I guess this tale violence. Like shows you how destructive it can be if a woman lies about that, and then people are like, oh, don't.
And what's funny, well, not funny, but like there are so many more stories in Greek myth of women getting raped, whereas the one that's like shocking is the one where she lies about. I mean, obviously it's a deplorable thing to do, and she definitely faces the consequences for that, and no one is saying that she was right to do that. But the sort of focus that gets attributed to it in comparison with the men who actually do rape women is just not. It's a very very clear double standard, obviously, and that's not a case of us being like, yes, queen, like it's obviously a horrible thing to do, but just some perspective I think is worth keeping in mind when you're sort of engaging with this story. And also, again, it's that thing of when it came up when we talked about Jocasta, the sort of villainization of the older woman who feels desire, again, at the forefront of this sort of fear-mongering story, and So Phaedra is the daughter of King Minos and Queen Pasiphae. It's Pasiphae because of the two dots above the E. I don't know if it's E, but like it's Pasiphae rather than like Pasiphae. And she is the Phaedra is the sister of Ariadne and is the half sister of the Minotaur, and she actually has like witchy abilities because Circe, that one we all know, is a witch, and so Phaedra has retained these sort of witchy abilities, and if not overt magic, she's very good at like trickery, you know, just like she's smart, basically. She's a smart lady. And men are not. So this one's quite complicated because there's quite a lot of incestuous shit going on before even Phaedra falls in love with her stepson.
It's to do with Aphrodite and the stepson offending her,
but also Ariadne was married or in a relationship with Theseus, and he, you know, wrongs her. He just like forgets that she's there and he leaves her. So then Ariadne, who's Phaedra's sister, curses him to, like, you know, I think either kill himself and like basically self-destruct and destroy his family, unknowing that in the future her sister Phaedra will be Theseus's family. So again, that's sort of an element of the story that's like a bit okay. Lots of curses, and crossovers. And then
the stepson, I forget his name, stepson.
Hippolytus.
Hippolytus is not into sex or love
in
or
one
anything
version.
In one version.
He's like almost disgusted by the notion of women wanting sex, and it, like, you know, and that pisses off Aphrodite
who
because she wants everybody to be thinking that beauty and sex is amazing. So she is very angered by the fact that Hippolytus rejects that life for himself, and so as like a sort of punishment to him, which obviously affects Phaedra more than it affects him, she curses Phaedra to like be afflicted with love for her stepson.
And she lives with this kind of cursed love, kind of depression for like years before anything happens.
It's like she's shown as this disgusting figure, but she's in like actual turmoil. And there are, you know, you can see on the screen the photo on the painting on the left. She's like in turmoil, being attended to by servants. She like can't eat, she can't sleep, she's sweating, she feels like she's afflicted by some sort of sickness. And then she reveals that it's an actual fact, it's an affliction of the heart, and she is in fact in love with her stepson. And there's a version of the story where I think she confesses, and then there's another version where like she confesses to her nurse, and then the nurse ends up telling him, and then, you know, obviously Phaedra doesn't want that, and then that's what brings about her you know, suicide, is that, you know, she can't face the fact that he knows and that he will tell Theseus, because that's another element of the story as well, that like she's still married but Theseus has been off fighting, and almost it's like, you know, it's wrong on both accounts, like incest not cool, but like adultery also not cool. And there are multiple versions of the story where like Theseus is like doesn't come back, and so it's like seen as okay because she's not still married, but then like it's still weird. So again, like the morals are just a bit of a spider's web, because it's like, well, is this okay, but then this isn't okay, and then it's okay if he's here, but then you know, it's like very
and then there's some versions that she's, you know, leaves the note before, but isn't there some versions where she doesn't say that she's been raped, but someone else says it after she's killed herself to kind of save face or something? And then there's also other versions where she does that bit because
she's trying to protect her children,
protecting her children, and also other versions where she's does it because she's like angry that he's found someone. Because there's some versions where he is, you know, he does love
one woman. There's a version where he does have a woman that he's in love with, so that's obviously Phaedra's like sexual rival, and in order to sort of spite her, that's why she writes that he's raped her, which obviously is a stupid thing to do. But in the sort of earlier versions, it's because she has children of her own that are not Theseus's children, I don't think. But basically, once she wants to kill herself, but she knows that if she dies, there'll be no one there to advocate for her children. So it will be very easy for Theseus and for Hippolytus to sort of like do whatever they want with her children and not have to give them anything. So I think in a way it's like throwing this accusation at him in a way ensures her children's future, because if he's out of the picture, then they are the next in line to inherit everything. So again, not the right thing to do, but you know, she's a woman afflicted with a sickness, which was Aphrodite's fault. Again, Aphrodite causing shit.
I didn't realise how much shit she causes.
I know, because when you think of her, you're like, oh yeah, her job is to sit there and be pretty and revel, but she's like a bitch. And I hate using that word, but like,
I kind of love her for it though.
I mean,
causing so much chaos.
She causes a lot of chaos, but like, why? Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of people cause chaos to get something out of it. You're like, okay, sure, but like, she literally doesn't really get anything out of it.
She's literally Georgina from Gossip Girl.
Yes,
she's like that
Ooh,
girl. Oh, that scared me.
Hello.
Are you finished?
No.
When are you finished?
Give us till 9, maybe. Sorry, Dad. He's waiting for us to have dinner. Oh my god, we have to speed.
Okay,
which is so upsetting.
I think we've
we've
lot
covered a
down.
lot.
I'm just aware that the next one I think is your favourite one.
It
so
is. Oh
we
my
should,
goodness. Okay. So yeah, if you want to find out more about Phaedra, read the book.
Or Fedora.
Fedora, yeah, iconic queen Fedora. Oh, here she is, Medea, queen. Well, I mean, okay, so Medea is, I think Natalie Haynes puts it, if Clytemnestra, whatever, is like, you know, the bad wife and Penelope is the good wife, then Medea is like the bad mother. You know, that's like her shtick. You know, she's the worst mother there ever was, ever, because she kills her children. Spoiler. So the origin of this story is first performed in 431 BCE, and it's in a play by Euripides. And Natalie Haynes actually at the beginning of the chapter draws a more comparison to the Beyonce like Hold Up Lemonade video, where it's like, is it better to be a jealous and crazy woman or just be perceived as a jealous and crazy woman? Because you'll probably be perceived that way either way, so you might as well just do the deed and be crazy. So basically, you know, it is well lauded how clever Medea is, like throughout this, you know, play. She occupies this liminal space between goddess and woman, and she ends up defeating this guy Talus at the Argonautica, who's this like person who's been attacking the ship, and she's the only one that can find his weakness. And she, you know, she saves all the men, and she's, you know, she's just doing a lot of stuff that men cannot do, basically. And she is married to Jason, and at the beginning of her story, her and Jason and their 2 children are exiled for, you know, cause and death, destruction, all that fun stuff. And then, you know, they're not really living happily in exile because Medea's worst nightmare comes true, and Jason finds a lover. And she is just absolutely incensed by this. Like, it's, she talks about it being like a destruction of her psyche. She talks about it being the worst thing, that he is the worst of men, that this is, you know, honestly the worst thing that should have happened to her.
Like part, like you said, like a liminal space between kind of like, you know, goddess and mortal.
Yeah,
she feels like she cannot be seen to be kind of what's the word, you know, to be shat on.
Yeah, exactly.
She cannot, you know, let, you know, her husband get away with it, basically.
Yeah, and there are multiple. I mean, Natalie Haynes talks about how calm Medea is and how she addresses the audience and how she really gets them on side. And she talks about the fact that she's away from home and that she is in a foreign land, and that, you know, women in the audience, you have your families and your friends to rely on. I don't have any of that. And you know, how unfair is it that, you know, women are when we get married, they have to pay dowries, and we are owned by men, and they get to go and do what they want, and all of this, like, very
and we
common.
can be so easily
Yeah.
flung aside.
And she sort of laments all these like very normal struggles for everyday women. But what's interesting is that none of that happened to Medea, really. Like, she's actually
she twists it.
Yeah, she's this extraordinary woman who didn't really have to deal with any of that. She has
And
magical
abandons
power,
her
and she
family.
abandons her family. She kills her younger brother.
Yeah.
So, like, all of this stuff about, oh, I'm alone, like, a lot of it's her own fault, but she really plays on the women in the audience to, like, get on side with her, because she knows what words to say that will make them feel sympathy for her.
And she gets the whole, like, local village to be on her side, even though it's,
Yeah, so they know whatever's going to happen to Jason is going to be gruesome, but they think that he deserves it because of the way Medea has painted the story. And whether or not he does, I mean, that's a personal choice, but and what line that really struck out to me, and I think makes her my favorite, is in this big speech that she's giving direct to the audience. She says, I would rather die in battle than give birth to a single child. I just think that is the most iconic thing anyone has ever said, ever. And I just love it so much. Like, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, she's really playing on these, like, gender roles. Like, and this was in the original Euripides text. This is, like, way before any modern, like, feminist adaptation of it. Like, it's right there in the ancient Greek, which I think is fascinating, because I think we touched on it at the beginning, but it's good to mention now. Often the more modern versions are the ones that are more sanitized to, like, our modern palette.
And she's kind of a side character that comes in very minimally. Like, it goes through some, like, film adaptations, doesn't it? Where she's, if you actually read, kind of earlier text, she's the one that, kills these villains and does all these things. But then in the, a more recent adaptation, she's kind of aiding a hero.
And obviously, the story plays out in a way that we recognize. So Medea weaponizes her children when she finds out about, Jason's affair and the lover. And so she gets her children to gift clothes and gowns to Jason's lover, and they are dipped in poison. So when she puts them on, she immediately dies. Her father, the king, rushes in, and then he dies because he touches the clothes. And then, it's sort of like, okay, well, she's had her revenge. Like, you don't have to do anything else. And then she immediately shocks the audience and sort of betrays their trust in her when she announces her intention to kill her children. And at first she's like, well, this is what will hurt Jason the most. And you're like, okay, I sort of get that. But then she sort of chickens out, and she's like, oh, wait, no, like, I love my children way more than Jason does. So any pain that I do to him, I'm doing to me tenfold. Like, why am I doing
Jason
this?
Jason was fine with her and the children being exiled because he wanted to get with this other
woman.
So
she really ums and ahs about this, but then very much comes down again on
comes down to her kind of ego, I guess, is that she doesn't want to be seen as backing down, and that is more important to her than the love of her children.
And in a way, there's also a suggestion as well that because it is kind of widely known at this point that Medea has killed Jason's lover and the lover's, by proxy, the lover's father, which is the king, that her children are actually going to be under threat anyway by everyone in the kingdom, and that they would die much more gruesome deaths at the hands of other people than at the hands of their mother. Although the weapon that she chooses to kill them is a sword. Again, subverting the normal choice for women, which would be poison. She kills them in quite a gruesome way with a sword. But what's really interesting to me about this story of Medea is, one, not only the sort of brutality of it and the fact that she's so unapologetic, really, is that she actually is almost endorsed by the gods, which is so weird, because there are so many other stories where, crimes are committed like this, killing your children or eating your children, that are seen as deplorable, and then you have to answer for those to the gods. But she is I think a granddaughter of Helios, and he gives her his chariot. He gives her this godly chariot to escape from, because she's now being hounded for causing all these deaths, and she like rises on the stage, and it's often only like in plays it's only the gods that take this sort of higher form, and it's really weird that this deplorable woman has sort of achieved this status, and I just find it really really interesting. And actually a lot of modern adaptations, Natalie Haynes writes in the end of the chapter, sort of do like a Macbeth-like twist where she actually descends into madness by the end of the play. But that's not true. She is very calm, and she knows exactly what she's doing, and she knows exactly why she's doing it, and she's like sane throughout, you know. And that's what I find weird, is that, you know, modern versions almost shy away from the brutality of the original text, where actually what is there is much more, I don't want to say feminist statement, it's not a feminist thing to kill your children, but like, she's making a choice, and you're taking that agency away from her by saying, oh, she's mad, or she was driven mad by this sexual jealousy, you know. But anyway, yeah, I think, yeah. And then obviously they have, you know, sort of modern, the way this appears in sort of our society now is that we have what's called the Medea hypothesis, where it's like we are living on a planet that is eventually going to consume us rather than the other way around. And that obviously is named after Medea, and Toni Morrison's Beloved is sometimes labeled as a Medea narrative because it features a woman who sets out to kill her child. But in that story it's very different, and because she believes that the death at the hands of her is better than her child, a life of slavery. So again, we sort of cycled back to the sort of struggle with a lot of these stories, is that the versions are wildly different. You know, do we prefer the story in which Medea intentionally kills her children and her agency is there and she's making that choice and she knows why she's making it, or do we prefer alternate versions where she thinks that her children will be saved by a goddess and they end up dying not by her hand and unwillingly, and she doesn't know that they're actually going to die? Do we prefer that ending? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know. So it's a difficult one. But it's definitely the one that I think captured my imagination the most. And the one that I think I'll want to go back to probably and research more of. And there's some beautiful art on the screen of painters that have similarly been captured by this story. So yeah, very interesting. And I think, are we on the last one now? Oh, we might have to speed through. And I'm not going to lie, Penelope's probably one of the least interesting ones. So maybe we can do this one a little bit quicker than all the other ones.
To the weaving.
Back to the world of weaving.
As we said before, she's kind of like a contrast to Clytemnestra. So she's seen as the good wife. She, you know, holds out for Odysseus for 20 years, 10 years while he's in the Trojan War, and 10 years where he just gets lost on the way home, basically, and ends up with two different wives. Like, well,
not wives, affairs,
affairs.
Circe and Calypso.
So one for 7 years, and then Circe was for 1 year, I think. And he's kind of trapped, but he's also not.
So Calypso offers him like immortality if he'll stay with her, and he's like, no, I've got to get back to my wife. So like he's unfaithful.
It's also like that was 7 years after being with her. You know what I mean?
It's
like he had a good time. You know, he wanted to have a good time before he left.
Well, it's like he's faithful but unfaithful, because it's like he's unfaithful sexually. You know, he's having these affairs, but he never entertains the idea of a future with any of these women. He's always like, I'm gonna get back to my wife, which is, and I guess there's a bit where Natalie Haynes is like, oh, you know, should we impose like our modern morals onto ancient texts? Like, is there a part of Penelope that just like expects this is going to be what he does? Like, is she genuinely waiting at home, refusing all of these suitors because she thinks he's doing the same, or does she just like accept the fact that he's doing that and just makes her own choice like separate from that?
I mean, shit was hard for women. I mean, it still is now, but like it's like a woman having an affair was a far bigger deal than a man having an affair, which I think is still true.
Oh, for sure. We saw what happened to Kristen Stewart, didn't we? That was her problem rather than the man who was married with children. But anyway, digress. I'll always defend Kristen when it comes to hell or high water. I will defend her. I mean, cheating's wrong. I will put that out there, but I feel like the way she was villainized was just not cool. So Penelope, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. What do I have on Penelope? What's interesting is that she, this weaving story, is that obviously in the interim when Odysseus is gone, all of these suitors are lining up at her door. They're like, "Hey, can we marry you? Because Odysseus is probably dead." And she's like, "No, thanks." But she can't get rid of them. They're like in her house eating her food, and she's like, "Can you not?" And so she tells them, "Okay, I will pick one of you when I finished weaving my shroud." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So then
She had
she
to give to Odysseus's father.
yes,
Yeah.
Laertus. And so she spends all day weaving, and then in the night she secretly unravels what she has weaved in the day, and so then it takes her like 3 years.
Yeah,
and they're like,
the
"Oh."
gods haven't like noticed that maybe
They
something is
don't.
going
They
on.
don't twig. They think, "Oh, maybe
Yeah.
it just takes 20 years to make a shroud." I guess I don't know.
And they all kind of at this point, she is an older lady.
Yeah.
And the kind of theories are that why they are like holding out for her and like is because they believe that they will get the throne, the kingdom.
For sure.
So they're in it for the long term to get, power basically.
Yeah, it's not about her and how beautiful and amazing she is.
Yeah.
It's about them wanting power and obviously wanting Odysseus out of the picture. And what's interesting is as there's like, this weaving story comes up multiple times in the Odyssey. I believe it is in several, there are 3 times it is mentioned. And then the second time, it's when Odysseus comes back, but he's like disguised as a beggar for some fucking reason.
Why? Because he finally comes back after 20 years and he decides to dress as an old
I think it's
beggar.
like to test her,
and
because
I think
it's like
to test
yeah,
her,
it's like if she was really in love with him, wouldn't she just recognize him whatever he was wearing? I was like, but she hasn't seen you for 20 years, bro. Like, why would she recognize you?
It was that, yeah.
So then, in this exchange,
I think it was also to get her to tell the story of whether she was actually faithful, because obviously it's not.
Yeah, and
she doesn't think she's telling her life story to her husband.
Yeah,
and she was
says
faithful.
like, "I weave deceit," and it's all about how that's the element that they share what makes them like such a well-matched couple, that they're both deceitful in different ways. But they both get what they want out of their relationship. I think at the end of the day. And obviously there are multiple different versions, as we've seen in like every other iteration of every other story. And there are some versions where she is completely chaste and she is the model wife and everybody wants her. And that's interesting as well, because it's like, well, by men saying that, by saying she's the model wife, are they just then saying that so they can use it as a way to put down other women who do not act like her?
Yeah.
She's like this ideal woman that they keep telling us is the ideal woman, so they can shame other women for not being at her level,
standard.
Right? But there are also alternate versions of the text where she wasn't faithful and she did take a lover and she was not like the perfect wife. So honestly, I think that loops us nicely back around to like, can you even get Greek myths wrong? Like, I was so nervous about like doing this or saying the wrong thing or like mixing someone up with someone else. But honestly, like, there are so many different versions that whatever version you ascribe to, there's probably like reason to believe that could have happened or would have been a version. And because so much of it is also just lost. We genuinely don't know. We're just basing all of these things off of fragments of other people's stories that are quoting other people's stories. We don't know how long it goes down, like turtles all the way down. How many texts are quoting other texts that now don't exist.
And if someone got jar and box mixed up in their quote, they could have, if we've lost the actual
maybe it was a
poem
suitcase.
Exactly. Who knows?
Who knows? I feel like we rushed through Penelope, but honestly, we need to wrap this up. Get our soups. But if you're interested in finding out more about Penelope, obviously you've got Pandora's Jar as a resource, but also the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood, we have been assured, is a great resource for learning more about
also
Penelope.
Loves this book.
Did she blurb it?
Yeah, she says, funny, sharp you know, what these stories not, oh gosh, what these sometimes not very nice women were up to, and how they sometimes made idiots of
Men.
Yeah, but
I
she
see.
says, but read on.
Men.
Yeah.
we know what you're on about, Margaret.
Yeah.
But yeah, Margaret wrote the Penelopead, which is a retelling of the Iliad, but if it was from Penelope's point of view, because she's the one who waits for fucking ages. So yeah, I mean, I guess we've just come back to the point that we began this, which is like, these women are multifaceted. They're not all good. They're not all bad, and they were misrepresented essentially. And I hope, you know,
mostly by modern
day writers, which is really annoying. So yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed our discussion. If you've stayed this long, really honestly, thank you, because we were really worried about this.
Yeah,
this one.
Like,
so
I think this is the one that we've been most nervous about.
Yeah, because there's so much information to convey and also so much to get wrong. So if you've stayed this long and you've really enjoyed it, like, please let us know, and I'm so glad that you're here with us. And if you want to be with us next month, in the month of not October, September, this month,
but we're gonna do it on the 1st of October, Friday the 1st of October.
So you've got 2 weeks.
We'll be reading it throughout September.
But yeah, so because this one was a bit late, there's a bit of a quick turnaround till our next live show, but that will be on the 1st of October, like Bea has said, and it will be on Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson, which is hopefully going to give us some creepy September Dark Academia vibes, because we're set at a university where a girl goes missing and it's very ethereal and vibes, and we're ready for it. We're ready to discuss it. We're ready to get spooked, and I'm going to start this one tonight, so I'm not last minute again.
Spooky vibes.
Spooky vibes. And yeah, again, a million thank yous if you've enjoyed it, and thank you to Leanne for leaving us little purple hearts. Love you. And yeah, we really hope you've enjoyed it, and we will see you on the 1st of October for Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson. So goodbye. Thank you. Bye. I have to twice, Jesus.